good to go. Hello, everyone. Everyone hear me? My name is Zimmer Barnes, and I'm here to talk to you all about the end of the world as we know it. So this is Congressman Larry McDonald, and he is a congressman, or was a congressman, from the great state of Georgia. The last 12 minutes of his life was an absolute nightmare. In 1983, he was flying to South Korea to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the United States-South Korean Mutual Defense Treaty. So in those days, in 1983, the plane had both a digital compass and a mechanical one, and this mechanical one could deviate by up to 15 degrees. In this instance, almost immediately upon takeoff, the compass began to deviate as they were using the mechanical compass. This took it hundreds of miles off course and into Soviet airspace, near very important military installations of the Soviet Union. Lieutenant Colonel Ozapovich was dispatched in a fighter plane, and he was ordered to fire on the commercial jet, thinking that it was a spy plane, and he did so. Missile fragments hit the tail end of the plane. It miraculously stayed in the air, but only for another 12 minutes. There were 269 passengers on board KAL Flight 007, and all 269 passengers perished in the crash. This included 61 Americans, 23 children under the age of 12, and Congressman Larry McDonald from the great state of Georgia. The international and domestic outcry is, as you would imagine, Ronald Reagan himself denounced it in his words, "This crime against humanity must never be forgotten, here or throughout the world." Press accounts reflect an explosion of condemnation by people everywhere. Now, what Ronald Reagan didn't mention is this. This is a report on a NATO exercise called Able Archer 83. Able Archer 83 simulated nuclear launches via radio, and it moved 40,000 physical NATO troops across Europe. Here's some troops of NATO that were participating in the Able Archer 83 exercise. Now, the Soviet Union was paranoid enough to shoot a passenger plane out of the air, thinking that it was a spy plane. So they saw this Able Archer 83 exercise not as a simple exercise, but as a prelude to invasion. So this continued around the clock for 3 weeks, until we come to Serpukhov 15. Serpukhov 15 is a Soviet military base, and their job is to monitor for nuclear detonations. So for some reference, this is a Pershing II missile. These were installed in Germany in 1983. These could be launched from Germany and reach Moscow within 10 minutes, and everyone at Serpukhov 15 knew that. So it's very crucial that they report these nuclear launches if they were detected. Now, this is Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, and he was commander of Serpukhov 15 during the KAL 007 crash and the next 3 weeks after. This is a time of strayed nerves. Everyone's very, very anxious and stressed around the clock. They think that an invasion of the Soviet Union is imminent. And it was 3 weeks after that, after the Lieutenant Colonel Ozapovich shot down KAL Flight 007, that the installation and equipment at Serpukhov 15 detected a nuclear launch. Following military protocol, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov phoned into his superiors and reported it. However, he stressed that it was his professional opinion that it was an equipment malfunction, that the United States had not fired a nuclear weapon at the Soviet Union, and there should be no retaliation. In his own recollection of this, the instant he set down his phone with his superiors, the equipment went off again and detected a further 4 nuclear launches. At this point, his military protocol is very clear. He is supposed to phone this into his superiors and have no more control over what happens after that. Now, the nuclear weapons that the Soviet Union had were not at Serpukhov 15. So once he made that phone call, he would have no control over whether the Soviet Union would launch a full nuclear strike against the United States. He decided not to follow his military protocol. He took over Serpukhov 15 and took it out of the Soviet chain of command and decided to wait this out on a hunch. And of course, he was correct. There were no nuclear strikes. And it may well be thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov that we are all here today. This talk is called Vigilante Justice, Masks, Guns, and Networks. And I chose those 3 words specifically. When I talk about masks, I'm going to be talking about how vigilantes stay anonymous or whether they choose to be anonymous at all. When I talk about guns, I'm not only talking about the weapons they use, but also the tools they use. Many of the world's most successful vigilantes don't use any violence at all. And finally, networks, how they network, how they recruit, and how they collaborate with other vigilantes. So my name is Zimmer Barnes, and I got to grow up in the world that Stanislav Petrov preserved. This is my mom, and you may be able to tell by the picture that this is a mugshot. She was an attorney, and she was first arrested in front of me when I was 9 years old. Throughout her career, she continued to fight for clients that were either poor, women, or people of color, and she frequently had conflicts with police. She frequently taught me to have a very healthy disrespect for authority, and I took this in a somewhat extreme direction. This is me. I'm in the lower right-hand side in the gray shirt with the binary code. And these people are real-life superheroes. Specifically, this is the group Super Anonymous, which was active in New Orleans post-Katrina. We aided the city by rebuilding houses with Habitat for Humanity, aiding the guardian angels on patrol, and donating to the homeless. Now, the real-life superhero community has a lot of diversity. So on one end, you have this guy. This is Phoenix Jones, and he's highly controversial within the community. He fights violent crime and often uses violence in self-defense of himself and others. On the other end of the spectrum is this guy, Thanatos. Thanatos dresses in a mockery of death and tries to save homeless and drug addicts in his city from an early death. Provides care packages and counseling for people that are in horrible situations. He's a real-life superhero that never uses violence during his missions and represents the other end of the real-life superhero spectrum. So if you trace superhero legend back in time, you get to a little bit of a kernel of truth, and that's this guy. This is James F. Phillips, and he began doing missions in 1969. His method of choice was environmental sabotage. There was a local company in Chicago that was pumping toxic waste into a local river, and he would block up the pipes or sometimes take samples of the toxic sludge and splash it about corporate headquarters so the company could no longer pretend that it was harmless. He went by the name the Fox after the Fox River that he was trying to protect. There's quite a bit of evidence that the police knew his secret identity, but never pursued him. And he was the first person to be called a real-life superhero. Now, there's previous instances prior to 1969 where we can look at people and perhaps call them a real-life superhero. All these men, if you're a history buff, you know that these are the Sons of Liberty, and we all know the story of the Boston Tea Party. Activists put on costumes to conceal their identity and appear as a monotonous group and engaged in civic protest. Not very different from our modern-day Anonymous. We all know that story, so I won't dwell on them. Instead, I want to tell you about this guy. This is Nat Kinney, and he founded a group which has a terrible name. They're the Baldknobbers. And he founded, it's an awful name, and he founded them in 1883. And they look like this. They're actually kind of terrifying. This isn't actually the Baldknobbers. This is from a 1919 silent film about them, but it's very accurate in terms of their appearance. They're active throughout Missouri, and this time in American history was very volatile. There wasn't a lot of police in a lot of the rural areas, and this organization was unique because they didn't have an overt white supremacist agenda as many vigilante operations at the time did. When you talk about vigilante justice, particularly in the United States, it's really hard not to talk about white supremacy. This is the KKK. They're perhaps the most recognizable of these vigilante operations. And what many people don't know about the KKK is that they've been successfully infiltrated several times. So this obviously is Superman, and he fought Nazis and Hitler in the 1940s radio program. But after the end of World War II, the writers struggled to find new villains for Superman to face. It was very important that they find villains for him to face because they were sponsored by Kellogg's Pep cereal, and if no children were listening to the radio program, no one would be buying any cereal. So they were very desperate for Superman to find some new villains, and they turned to this guy. This is Stetson Kennedy, white gentleman, obviously, and he infiltrated the KKK on purpose. He disapproved of them, and he talked with other members who had become disillusioned with the Ku Klux Klan, and really it was all a big scam. They would drum up a lot of fear of these members, and these members had to pay dues, and it would all go to the higher-ups in the KKK. So really they didn't care about taking over the world or white supremacy per se. It was just kind of a Ponzi scheme. So they turned to Stetson Kennedy, and Stetson Kennedy had infiltrated. He acquired all of this secret information on what was a secret society at the time. This is the 1940s. This is 20 years before the Civil Rights Movement. The KKK is like a country club. But he compiles all this secret information, and he gives it over to the Superman radio program. Instead of going to write a book or go to a journalism, he goes to the Superman radio show program, and they love it because they're looking for new villains because we've ended World War II. They ran away with it. It was called Clan of the Fiery Cross. It was enormously successful at the time. It's available for free online, and I highly recommend it, especially if you are a Superman fanboy or girl. So while we're on the subject of white supremacy, we may as well talk about these guys. These are the Black Panthers, very recognizable group. They were really trailblazers that influenced the missions and activities of vigilantes to this day and borrowed a lot of tactics from the earlier Baldknobbers. Again, a horrible name. This is the Black Panthers during an armed protest in the late 1960s. One of the things many people don't know about the Black Panthers is that they ran a free breakfast program for kids. The rationale was that kids could not succeed in school if they were going hungry. The federal government was so ashamed at the attention that this gave the Black Panthers that the federal government started funding their own free breakfast and lunch programs in schools, which we have today. You can thank the Black Panthers for your free breakfast or free lunch programs in school. So the Black Panthers were immediately influential. They were active all over. This is a guy named Reverend Ray Brochures. And he was an openly gay reverend in San Francisco in 1973, in case you thought you had a bad day. He would get attacked and harassed by gay bashers. He would call the police. The police would tell the gay bashers that he ratted to the police, and he got the crap beat out of him, and he thought it was terrible. He thought if Black people can form the Black Panthers, he should be able to form his own group, and he formed a group called the Lavender Panthers. And instead of arming themselves with firearms, they armed themselves with pool cues and went around in a white van and beat the crap out of anybody that was doing something they weren't supposed to in 1973 San Francisco. So all of these groups were kind of leading up to these guys as the Guardian Angels. They're also very recognizable. This is the group that patrolled in New Orleans post-Katrina. They're all absolutely badass. And they were founded in the late 70s and followed in the footsteps of the Black Panthers and the Lavender Panthers. So I tried to get as much good citation as possible for this, and I do not have good citation for the story. This is just Guardian Angels legend. But according to legend, there was an NYPD strike. The police officers that were patrolling the city in New York City were getting paid better than police officers that were patrolling the subway. And all the NYPD officers in the subways went on strike. So there's absolutely no presence in the New York City subways in the late 1970s. So it was an absolute disaster. And this guy, this is an aggressively 70s poster. The guy in the middle is Curtis Sliwa. According to legend, he and 12 others McDonald's employees, he was working at McDonald's at the time, went down into the subways and they called themselves the Magnificent 13. They patrolled, they beat the crap out of anybody that was doing something they weren't supposed to and did citizens arrest. And they eventually went on to form the Guardian Angels. They're active all over the world today. Speaking of all over the world, vigilantes and vigilantism is not strictly an American phenomenon. This is the Banda region of India, and it's one of the poorest in the nation. In 2008, a very corrupt power plant cut off electricity to the region and demanded ransom. Essentially, they kept billing people for electricity they had not received. This is India. It was extraordinarily hot here today in New York. In the Banda region of India, it's frequently over 100 degrees, so it's a very big deal to not have any electricity for even a day. And this corrupt power plant cut off electricity for a month. There was no higher agency that was stepping in to help. No larger government was going to stop this. All was lost. Until these ladies showed up. This is the Gulabi Gang, and they were started by a woman named Sampat Baldevi. They were able to recruit 400 women to storm the power plant. They broke in, they physically removed the employees working there and locked the facility, refusing to return the keys until power was restored, which it was within 60 minutes. So I love this picture because not only is she in the Gulabi Gang pink, Gulabi translates to pink, they're literally the pink gang, but she has her stick pink and she has her nails pink. She's very in the spirit. Like the Lavender Panthers, they carry sticks for self-defense, and here's them training on that. And they very much use these. Their targets not only include government corruption, but also they try to stop child marriages if a girl is being married off at the age of 12, or any kind of domestic violence. You'll just have several dozen or hundreds of these show up in your lawn and tell you very nicely to not beat your wife anymore. And they're very effective in India. So obviously, as a vigilante, when I was a kid, I had a lot of big shoes to fill. And so I joined an organization called the Heroes Network. This was a message board online. And we wanted to see what we could do in one city if we concentrated our efforts instead of just doing stuff online, individual, all across the world. So Superheroes Anonymous was the organization I was a part of before, but they were very focused on charity, doing stuff with Habitat for Humanity. They didn't focus on violent crime. So our focus was going to be violent crime. And we picked Kansas City, Missouri to do that. It's a very high crime, it was then and it is now a very high crime organization. And I worked with this lady, Nix. You can tell both of us are out in the sun all the time. And Nix was located in Kansas City and knew the area. And she'd been patrolling there since she was 16 years old. This is her in her superhero uniform. And we did a little bit of recon and looked at a lot of gang graffiti in Kansas City. So to me, at the time especially, this seemed absolutely chaotic. I didn't get any information about this. If any of you have been in a street gang, this is going to be a lot more descriptive to you, and you'll understand how these tags can communicate a very vast amount of information to those in the know. So fortunately, our group was blessed by this guy. This is 10. And he came from such a background, and he was able to decipher a lot of these gang tags for us. This helped us focus on what areas of the city we should focus on as being high crime. This is a photo with faces blacked out accordingly of the last day of the Kansas City mission. Great weather then, but the weekend we were going to go out on our biggest missions turned out absolutely horrible. There was heavy rain and a tornado warning. So no one was going to be out. No one was going to be committing crimes. We'd all traveled all this way for this big experiment for nothing. And I felt like a failure until I thought more about these gang tags and talked with one of our members, Sir Steampunk, who had a really good suggestion. Turns out if you go to a hardware store, you can get spray-on paint remover. You spray it on, it's horribly caustic, it foams up, and you leave it foamed up on paint for about 10 minutes, and then it loosens it enough where you can rub it off with steel wool. So we grabbed several dozens of these cans and split up into teams, one to watch for other people so that we wouldn't be seeing another person to spray and remove. And we were able to remove several hundred gang tags out of the Kansas City warehouse district. Now, if you know anything about gangs, you know that they make most of their money off of drugs. And if you know anything about drugs, particularly marijuana, cocaine, and heroin, you know that it's produced outside of the United States, not grown domestically. So this is Culiacan, Sinaloa, and it's home to the world's most powerful organized crime syndicate. It's named after the Sinaloa region of Mexico. Here it is on the western coast. And they didn't become the largest criminal organization in the world by accident. They had a little bit of help from the DEA. This is David Gaddis, and in 2000 through 2009, he was the regional director of the DEA in Sinaloa, Mexico. And he authorized a deal with the Sinaloa cartel in 2000. The deal was that the Sinaloa cartel could import drugs into the United States without DEA interference if they provided intelligence on other cartels. Pretty sweet deal if you're the Sinaloa cartel. So this deal continued throughout 3 presidential administrations, starting in 2000 and only ending in 2012. Gaddis served no jail time and actually received the Distinguished Presidential Rank Award from President Obama in 2009. So he now heads a private security company and will never see jail time. So the Sinaloa cartel could import drugs as much as they wanted from 2000 to 2012. So they were very wash in cash. They were really bold. They could just drum up as much business as they wanted with no worry of the DEA interfering, and they became enormously wealthy, and they needed to launder the money at a really unprecedented rate. They had an enormous amount of money. I don't know if any of you are fans of the show Orange is the New Black, but it's based on a true story of Piper Kerman, and she was involved in money laundering and received 15 months in prison. And that's very important because I want to talk to you about Wachovia. Wachovia laundered a bit more than Piper Kerman did. Wachovia laundered $378.4 billion with a B for the Sinaloa cartel. So to put this in perspective, this is an amount equal to 1/3 of Mexico's entire GDP that went through Wachovia, little money laundering program for the Sinaloa cartel. The bank was fined less than 2% of their total annual profit for this activity. No criminal convictions were made, no one went to jail. Gets better. Not only did Wachovia get in on this, but also HSBC. They ended up being fined $1.9 billion in 2012 for laundering money for the Sinaloa cartel throughout 2007 and 2008. A leaked internal email from HSBC indicated that the bank was making $2.6 billion in profit that just that year from the Sinaloa cartels. Again, no criminal convictions were made, no one was arrested. Now, I don't know how many of you are good on math, but you may not have caught this. They made $2.6 billion. They were fined $1.9 billion. That's $700 million in profit, and no one went to jail. Hooray for HSBC. By the way, HSBC had 2.6 trillion with a T in assets at the time. So this is the equivalent of a man with a net worth of $100 being fined 7 cents. When asked about this to Attorney General Eric Holder, he said this: "I'm concerned that the size of some of these institutions becomes so large that it does become difficult to prosecute them." So he set 2 very important precedents here. 1, money launder for the largest criminal organization in the world, and no one in your organization or bank will go to jail. And 2, we'll make sure that the fine is so low that you'll still make a very handsome profits for your efforts. So the Sinaloa cartel is sitting great. They have this great deal with the DEA. They're running the spy organization on all of their competition, and they're getting to money launder massive amounts of money to where it's not even dirty money anymore. They can spend it on whatever they want. But they did have one really big problem, and that was the price of marijuana. Marijuana was their big cash crop. It was grown in Central America, gets trafficked through Mexico to a lot of people in the United States that want to smoke marijuana. But the price of marijuana started falling really steadily for years, and this was largely due to the legalization of medical marijuana in a lot of states, and also more legal U.S. production. So they get less and less profit from importing marijuana. Like any good company, they turn to a secondary product to supplement their income, and that's heroin. Now, Afghanistan is supplied in 90% of the world's heroin, but only 4% of the heroin that's sold and consumed in the United States is produced in Afghanistan. So most U.S. heroin is heavily cut with something called phenolin, and this adds a lot of potency to the drug, and it also makes it cheaper. But it also makes it easier to overdose because the dosage is very imprecise. Most heroin on the streets is 25% pure heroin, but there's no one regulating it. It can be anything you want, so it's easy to overdose. And the demographics of a heroin user have changed a lot over the last several decades. Today, there's a huge survey of a lot of heroin clinics, and not only heroin users, but people who are in recovery for heroin addiction. The average age of 9,000 participants today is 23, is the average age. 90% of them were white, and most of them were in the suburbs. There were at least as many people in the suburbs as there were in the cities. This is not historical for heroin. Usually heroin is a city drug, not a suburban drug, but now it's showing up in all these suburbs because the Sinaloa is so bold and they want to supplement their income by importing heroin. So this is a little bit of a price guide. These figures are imprecise, and the price of drugs can vary all around the world, and especially around the United States. Each state has a little bit different price. But as you can see, if you're a good businessman, if marijuana is $20 or less per gram, $20 a gram being something really, really high end, heroin being $60 to $120 per gram, and meth being $60 to $80 per gram, you'd much rather be in the meth business or the heroin business than the marijuana business today. So this deal with the DEA, but with the Sinaloa cartel, meant that the cartel had to provide a lot of intelligence on other cartels. So they started this huge spy ring so they could keep up their end of the bargain and keep this sweet deal with the DEA. So one of the cartels that they targeted were the Caballeros Templarios, or the Knights Templar. And this is a Facebook post from a low-level Knights Templar member. This is a car filled with marijuana. And it was uploaded to Facebook with the post, "Animo plebada puro zacate para los gorritos," which I am told is very Mexican Spanish and roughly translates as, "I encourage your crowd that there's plenty of grass for the white people." So this is kind of what we think of as marijuana importers. It's just this great Seth Rogen adventure, and it's just fun, and it's just like any other business. It's not really that harsh. It's not that dark. And perhaps it was a little bit more like that before 2000 and before this deal with Sinaloa. So the Sinaloa cartel starts running this huge spy ring. Knights Templars are getting crushed. They're not laundering as much money. They're not acting so bold because they can get caught by the DEA, and they're being targeted by spies. So it should come as no surprise that they got very, very desperate, and this desperation led to really extreme violence. The next 2 slides are, I tried not to do them too gruesome, but if you really, really don't like to see dead bodies, close your eyes. This is some of the many, many victims of the Knights Templar. So they knew that the Sinaloa had set up this intelligence gathering operation for the DEA, and they just started killing anyone they thought was a part of it. So this next slide is a little bit more blood, but I do want to show it to you because the back of this man's shirt says Grupo de Autodefensa, and this is Spanish for self-defense group. So no more gruesome slides. You can open your eyes if you were squeamish. These are these autodefense groups. So the Knights Templar became very desperate, and they would dominate whole areas. Whole towns would be taken over, and the Knights Templar would be the de facto government there, and they would run things. And the Mexican government wasn't strong enough to go in and retake the town. But these guys were. These vigilantes were. These are ordinary citizens armed with their own firearms. And in many cases, they were able to successfully go into cities and take them back from the Knights Templar who were in control of them. So at first, the police didn't know what to do with these guys. At first, they targeted the vigilantes as criminals, and then they more or less allowed them in this gray area. And then as they became more and more successful, they started deputizing them as police officers and simply required them to register their firearms. They had this big firearm registration day in Mexico. It was enormously successful. People came in to register their firearms and essentially moved from vigilante to police officer. And this is Hipólito Mora. He was one of several Autodefensa's founders. He was arrested. He's now out on bail. He hasn't gone to trial. A lot of this stuff is still unfolding, and we don't know how it's all going to end. Now, I did stress that a lot of vigilantes were successful, even if they didn't resort to violence. So I do want to tell you about this lady, Amina Matthews. So she was the daughter of Jeff Fort, and he was the founder of a group called El Rukn, and that is Arabic for the foundation or the corner. And El Rukn was considered the world's first super gang. Mr. Jeff Fort worked with Gaddafi's Libyan government to secure weapons to commit terrorist acts and bombings inside the United States. For this, he is serving life in prison. So Miss Matthews really is kind of like a princess or a queen in the criminal underground. Her father founded this radical organization. She could have gone on to import drugs. She could have run a cartel, a gang, become a terrorist. And instead, she worked with a group called Violence Interrupters. So she uses her prestige in the criminal world to mediate disputes between street gangs. She tries to find a peaceful solution to these disputes and minimize bloodshed and minimize shooting in the streets and all these turf wars. With the Sinaloa cartel pushing more and more heroin into the United States and into the suburbs, there's a lot of disruption in street gangs in terms of where their turf used to be and where it is now. So Miss Matthews and the Violence Interrupters certainly have a lot of work cut out for them. So meanwhile, the real-life superhero movement continued to grow in size and popularity, and we gained a lot of media around the world. And in some ways, this was great because we could use this media attention to shed light on problems like poverty or homeless or violent crime. I had one guy interviewing me. He's like, well, why do you dress up as a superhero to do all this stuff? Why couldn't you just do this as a person? I was like, right next door, there's a soup kitchen. They've been up and running for 20 years, and no one is ever going to interview them. They're never going to be on CNN. But I can, an activist can spend $10 on a cape and a mask, and now they've hijacked this media obsession with weird stories, and now they are on CNN, and they're talking about poverty instead of Britney Spears shaving her head. So I was very excited about the Kansas City mission, and a lot of people were, and we wanted to see what you could do if you could do Kansas City every weekend, if you could have a team operating in one city all the time. And so I was able to co-found a group called the New York Initiative. And so me and several others moved to New York, all lived in one apartment. These are all my roommates and colleagues on this team. From left to right, it's me, and the back is Lucid. The lady's name is Saf, and the guy on the far right is Zero. And we came to New York at a very interesting time. We were here only a few months before the NYPD tapes dropped from the Village Voice. So the NYPD tapes were collected by an officer named Adrian Schoolcraft. And he was an NYPD officer who wore a voice recorder on his uniform for an entire year during roll call and every private conversation he had with his superiors, and basically uncovered every kind of police corruption that we have a law for and a name for. So there was very overt racial bias. There were stop and frisk quotas that were supposed to be illegal. Worst of all, they were downgrading crimes. There was one instance of a serial rapist who raped several women, but every time it was reported, they would downgrade it to an assault, because they didn't want a rape on their district, on their precinct. So they would downgrade crimes. If it was a rape, they would downgrade it to assault. If it was an assault, they would downgrade it to harassment. People would call and say, my house was broken into, and they would tell them, if you're lying, we're going to find out, and we're going to come after you. You better not report this. So he uncovered all of this. It's all on tape, and the Village Voice ran with it. And one of the worst was, for an area of tens of thousands of people, sometimes there's only 3 to 9 parole officers on duty, and as you can saw, we were kind of 3 to 9 parole officers. So it kind of encouraged us to be a lot more active in our missions, especially in the more violent parts of Brooklyn. So we know stories about Adrian Schoolcraft, people like Chelsea Manning, people like Edward Snowden, who infiltrate an organization and then they do a leak. But sometimes you have to be very forceful. And that's the story I want to tell you next. So this is John and Bonnie Raines, and they're 2 of the 8 vigilantes that formed the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI in 1971. So they were concerned because they thought that federal spies were infiltrating and disrupting the civil rights movement and several other anti-war demonstrations and a lot of other activist organizations in the 70s. But they had no way to prove it. So if they went to the press, no one really cared. So they decided that they were going to do something really radical and commit the second most important heist in American history. So they decided they were going to just straight up break into the FBI's office. This was the early 70s. There were no digital files to hack into. They were going to go in and steal physical copies. And they decided that they were going to do it on March 8th, 1971, because this was the night that Joe Frazier was going to fight Muhammad Ali right across the street at Madison Square Garden. So at the time, Muhammad Ali's record was 31-0. Joe Frazier's record was 26-0. This was huge. Everyone was watching this, and they thought the streets were going to go crazy, when one of them won, and the police would be busy. And so they decided this is the perfect night to go to the FBI headquarters, pick the lot, break in wearing suits, find every piece of paper they can possibly find, load it into briefcases, and get out without anyone noticing. By the way, above the FBI offices was an apartment where an FBI agent was living and sleeping at the time, and they managed to break in, get the files, and get out without him knowing. So they're unloading all these documents, and they find this gold mine of a program called COINTELPRO. And this was an FBI operation to do exactly what they thought they were doing, to spy on and disrupt activist organizations across the United States. Or at least I kind of vaguely was aware that the FBI was wiretapping Martin Luther King, but this is how we know about this. We don't know about this because of a whistleblower or a Senate investigation. We know about it because someone committed a heist. So they took these COINTELPRO documents and they copied them and sent it to major news outlets. They sent it to the New York Times. They received these documents. The FBI ordered them to be returned to the FBI, and the New York Times complied. They also sent them to the Los Angeles Times. They received these COINTELPRO documents. The FBI ordered them returned. Los Angeles Times complied. They also sent them to the Washington Post. They received these COINTELPRO documents. The FBI ordered them returned. Katharine Graham was editor at the time, and this was 1971. She was the only female editor of a major newspaper in the United States. She had every reason to follow her colleague's plan and simply comply with the FBI and turn over the documents. When the FBI asked her to turn over the documents, she told the FBI that they could read about COINTELPRO on page 1 of the Washington Post. This is how we know. This is how we know that the FBI was trying to disrupt. Thanks to her decision and her decision alone, we know that the FBI was trying to not only spy on, but also disrupt Dr. King and the civil rights movement. There was even a plan to discredit Martin Luther King or take him out and have him replaced by a civil rights leader who would be more to their liking. And also they were domestic wiretapping on a really massive scale. This was 1971. No one was paranoid about this, and now we are. So meanwhile, in the present, the New York Initiative was really taking off, and we were followed for several months by a documentary crew. And their footage was eventually sold to HBO, and it aired in this documentary called Superheroes. It's now on Netflix if anybody wants to see it. And as soon as it aired, we began getting a flood of emails and requests to join, people that were former military, firefighters. So it was really great for recruiting. We went from an organization that looked like this to an organization that looked like this. And we could suddenly have a lot more possibilities at our disposal. So one of the guys that we recruited was this guy. His name is Shortcut. And he's absolutely amazing. And Shortcut was really helpful during Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if any of you were following Occupy Wall Street, but it originally started as this Twitter account that was called Day of Rage, which was also from the 1970s. In the 1970s, there was a big Day of Rage where people did a lot of activism. So there was this Twitter account called like the New Day of Rage that we're going to do this thing. And it was really mysterious what was going to happen. And what ended up happening was the first day of Occupy Wall Street. So these are some photos that Shortcut took of Occupy Wall Street. If you look, I'm the guy in the camo pants and black hoodie and shaved head to the right next to the yellow poncho guy. So this is Occupy Wall Street in Zuccotti Park. So at the time, the mayor of New York City was Michael Bloomberg. He was a billionaire, and this is a movement of the 99% versus the 1%. So he was very cautious and didn't want there to be any disruptions between police and protesters. So what he did was he had police surround the perimeter of the park to make sure they didn't bother anybody outside, but they were pretty much under strict orders not to go into the park, pretty much for any reason at all. This is an intentionally blurry photo of me and a guy named Shade, who was also on the team, under that big large metal sculpture that's outside the park. So since the NYPD wouldn't go into the park, it was essentially a no man's land. You had a lot of college kids who thought, oh, the community will watch my MacBook Pro. And that's not how New York works now, and it's not how it ever worked. And so a part of our mission there was to provide security. There really wasn't a good security force until we got there. And also part of our reason was to aid in medical emergencies. Here's the last gruesome picture. This is one of our members, Blitz. He's attending to this protester who has a medical emergency. Blitz and I ended up switching back and forth. There was a medical area of Occupy, and then there was the security patrols. If medical was understaffed, I'd go to medical. If medical was really well staffed, I would go with the security patrol. On one night of Occupy Wall Street, I'm sad to say that a woman was sexually assaulted by another protester. He held her down in her sleeping bag and rubbed himself on her. The NYPD were under strict orders to not enter the park, even to arrest a rapist. The New York Initiative worked out a deal with the police that if we could bring the alleged rapist out of the park by force, and the woman was willing to make a statement, they would arrest him. And I'm very proud to say that members of the team were able to get the guy, physically remove him. The woman did make a statement, and the man was put under arrest. So this kind of leads me to Anonymous in talking about Occupy Wall Street. And there's many, many stories of Anonymous that I could share that could take up hours and hours of a presentation. So I'll just focus on this one. This is from KY Anonymous. He gets the KY from Kentucky. And he was putting up these YouTube videos because he was very certain that there were guys on this local high school football team that had committed rape. Turns out he was right. He got smoking gun evidence. And these two guys, Trent Mays and Malik Richmond, went to jail for 1 year and 2 year sentences, respectively, for rape. Yes, rape. So one of them got 12 months for rape. The other got 24 months for rape because he also took pictures of the victim nude and distributed them, and this was considered harassment. So he got another year. So together, they have 3 years in prison for rape. But they also went after KY Anonymous and discovered that it was Derek Lowstutter. And he's currently facing 5 years in prison, more than twice, more than the two rapists combined in their sentence. So it's a story where he was very successful, but it's also a very tragic story that he's facing more jail time than a couple rapists that he exposed. So while hackers are being targeted, so too are environmental activists. 711 environmental activists were assassinated over the past 10 years. 106 were assassinated in 2013 alone. So 711 over 10 years, 106 just in the past, just in 2013. Most of these assassinations occur in Brazil, Peru, the Philippines, or Colombia, and most assassins are never brought to justice. And it seems to be increasing. Like I said, in 2013, there were the largest number of environmental activists killed on record. These are some local protests that are part of a tribe in Brazil that are protesting a summit on behalf of the rainforest being destroyed. There's also been a number of anti-government uprisings, starting with the Arab Spring, but continuing around the world. This is a photo that pretty much, the story kind of went viral, of these Ukrainian protesters in the uprising in that country holding up mirrors to shame the police. But the Ukrainian uprising wasn't just nonviolent, holding up mirrors. This is a scene that may look peaceful, but if you look closely at that guy in the pink blanket, what he's using as a pillow is what's called a trophy shield. This is a shield that he took from a riot cop, probably by force. So this Ukrainian uprising made their own kind of Occupy-style base in the center of a city and disrupted traffic. In the winter months, they built it out of snow and made this kind of ice fortress, and then later they made it out of tires once the ice started melting. And I want to talk to you about Żelazna Sotnia. Translated from Polish, that means the Iron Hundred. These were mostly former military members that were the most militant members of the protesters, who acted essentially as a security force to protect the protesters and their encampments from riot police. This is a far more violent protest than Occupy Wall Street was. This scene is them mourning comrades who were killed during struggle with riot police. So there are a lot of major issues, not only with various governments around the world, but also our own criminal justice system right here at home. And one of those issues, unfortunately, is its very legitimacy. This is the Juvenile Law Center, and they helped uncover something called the Kids for Cash program. Kids for Cash program went like this. These are two judges, Mark Ciavarella and Michael Conahan, and they were convicted of this Kids for Cash program. They had to deal with private prisons where there would be this juvenile offender who would come in for graffiti or talking back to his parents or any kind of minor offense, and he would give them the maximum possible sentence and send them specifically to this private prison instead of the public system. And so the private system then got money from the government because they were housing this prisoner, and then they would give a cut of that back to these judges. So these judges were making money off of sending kids to prison regardless of whether they were innocent or guilty. Fortunately, the Juvenile Law Center was able to uncover it. This is one of my favorite pictures from this story. This is a mother of one of the victims of the Kids for Cash program. She's yelling at the judge that illegally sentenced her son after he was convicted of the scheme. So even if you get convicted of a crime, we don't know that you're guilty. This is some statistics from the Innocent Project. Over 300 people have been convicted of serious felonies like rape or murder that have been proven innocent beyond a shadow of a doubt because of biological evidence. So the Innocence Project works with this biological evidence and tries to clear people's names if they believe that if they truly are innocent. But the vast majority of these cases where it's rape or murder, 90 to 95% of these felonies don't have any such conclusive evidence available at any time. So they're really only working with that 5 to 10% where they actually have evidence. And they've already uncovered 300 people that were completely innocent of the crime they were convicted of. And these 300 people served together over 4,000 years in prison for a crime that they didn't commit. Across the United States, there's a lot of militia groups that are popping up. One of the oldest of them is called the Minutemen, and they patrol the Mexico-U.S. border. They're very unique. They have a very strict non-racist policy. If any of their members are expressing any kind of racist sentiment, they're kicked out of the group immediately. This is not so for all militia groups. This is a Michigan militia. Here's another one. So in 2008, not that long ago, there were 149 active militias in the United States. Even if you don't follow this closely, you may be vaguely aware that there's more now. Maybe there's twice as more, 3 times as more, 5 times as more, but there's actually 8 times as much. While in 2008 there were 149 active militias, in 2013 there were 1,096. And of these, 240, explicitly say that they are armed militias. The vast majority of these are nonviolent, but they do prep for a future where times may become chaotic and they may use violence to achieve their ends. So this is a map of stand your ground laws. We all know the stand your ground case because of the killing of Trayvon Martin, and Florida got a lot of heat for having the stand your ground law, but actually from this map you can see that a lot of states have adopted it. 25 in total have a stand your ground law, and this means that if you feel threatened, if you feel like your life is in jeopardy, you can shoot at someone. If someone breaks into your house and then they flee, you can chase after them. So you can take yourself out of a safe position, put yourself into a dangerous position, and go and be aggressive against someone that's trying to hurt you. So these are some statistics about stand your ground laws. These are all different states. The red lines are states that have a stand your ground law enacted, and this is statistics of incidences of justifiable homicide since the law has been enacted. The blue lines are states that don't have a stand your ground law, and as you can see, there's this enormous rise in justifiable homicides in states that have this stand your ground law. And so I think this is unfortunately going to continue to accelerate in these states. One thing that I'm worried about and the media goes nuts over, and I think all of us are at least a little bit concerned about, is 3D printed firearms. This started off, they were just terrible. Even 6 to 12 months ago, 3D printed firearms were just a joke. But then they came out with this one not too long ago. This is a 3D printed firearm, and it fires 9 shots total, and the materials cost only $25 to make. So what I'm concerned about is this. This is the AK-47. It's the gun of choice in conflicts around the world. So if you are part of a terrorist organization or a militia or a government or anyone that's trying to buy a black market AK-47, these can run anywhere from $500 to $2,000 depending on the region of the world you're in, and these have a global average of $532. So my question is, and I think it's a question that's going to be answered very soon, is if you have a 3D printed handgun that you can make for $25, could you conceivably make a 3D printed AK-47 for $100? And if you can, how soon, and what does that do if you're, if you're a small organization, you have a limited budget, you're going to war on a dentist retirement account, instead of spending $500 for an AK-47, if you can spend $100 on an AK-47, you get 5 times as many AK-47s. So this new technology is going to, I think, drastically change the balance of power in a lot of very unstable regions of the world. While we're talking about firearms, of course, we need to talk about drones. We've all seen this, the Drone Survival Guide. I think very soon we'll also see, right around the corner, $100 drone that could be used for surveillance or even assassination. Right now, these are tools used by the United States. There's some other governments getting into this. I think very soon they're going to get down to the point where it's going to become very, very affordable for anybody with $100 to have a drone that you can rig up with nitroglycerin or have your own surveillance network of drones. And I think that's going to get very interesting and very dangerous for some already dangerous parts of the world. Now, there is a bit of precedence for vigilantes using unmanned aerial vehicles in dangerous or illegal missions. This is Park Sang-hak, and he fled North Korea, born in North Korea, fled, and now he has this program where he launches drones from South Korea into North Korea. North Korea is completely locked down, no internet, no information in and out, no major newspapers, no freedom of speech, and so he launches these drones, and this is what they look like. These are the balloons. They're set with this pre-pilot course that fly over and then drop contraband. And some of this contraband flown in and dropped into the country includes some stuff that we wouldn't think is very important, but is very, very important in North Korea. Some of the things are thumb drives that contain all of Wikipedia. Since you can't get any information, you can give them an entire encyclopedia that they connect to their computer. They also have VHS or DVDs, copies of soap operas. And this is simply to show average standard of living outside the world. Inside of North Korea, it's kind of said, like, the rest of the world is crap. Everyone lives like this. And they can show, no, in fact, just across the board in South Korea, everyone lives a very Western kind of lavish lifestyle compared to the poverty of North Korea. Excuse me. And another thing that they drop in are radios that are pre-tuned to stations that broadcast news from South Korea into North Korea so that people can get real-time information. One more vigilante that I want to talk to you about before we go, and that's Mary Bowser. She was born in 1840 as a slave to an owner, Elizabeth Van Lew, in the United States. So fortunately for Mary Bowser, Elizabeth Van Lew was an abolitionist, and Mary Bowser had an enormous amount of privilege for some of those born into slavery. She was able to attend an education, she was able to travel abroad, she was a missionary in Liberia, and she traveled all over the North. So what may not have been known to her at the time but was revealed to her was that Elizabeth Van Lew was secretly running a vigilante spy ring that sent intelligence to Union generals. These weren't government employees, it was an absolute vigilante operation. So Mary Bowser was very important. Not only was she extraordinarily intelligent, but she was gifted with an eidetic memory. We kind of think of fictional characters like Lex Luthor from DC Comics or Dr. Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. It's kind of this super photographic memory, but it really does exist. It's not a fantasy, and Mary Bowser was so gifted. If she saw something, she could remember it. And so these two women concocted this extraordinarily high-stakes plan. The plan was that Mary Bowser would sell herself back into slavery so that she could work at the Confederate White House, possibly get access to some illicit information, possibly be able to ferret that information out to these Union generals. She risked being trapped into slavery forever if the South won the war, endure extreme violence against herself, and possibly even be killed if she were exposed. Fortunately for all of us, Mary Bowser accepted this extraordinarily dangerous mission on behalf of this vigilante spy ring. She crafted this persona of being very feeble-minded, and she'd be cleaning or attending to things while these generals were having the meeting right there in the room. And then when she would clean offices, she would have access to all of these written documents, all of this correspondence, and she was able to remember all of it verbatim and then ferret out that information. So after the war, Ulysses S. Grant and many other Union generals credited Van Lew's vigilante spy ring as the best source of information during the war above any other government employee. In turn, Miss Van Lew credited Mary Bowser as the very best source of intelligence. After the war, the Union destroyed all records of this vigilante spy organization, including everything related to Mary Bowser. So we're never going to know exactly how big of an impact she made, but we could conclude that it was very substantial. It became kind of obvious in the Confederate White House that there was information ferreting out, and it kind of comes to this legend that I do not have solid verification, but I'll tell you the legend anyways. According to legend, they found out that it was Mary Bowser. Mary Bowser fled the Confederate White House, but not before setting it on fire. And so, like Stanislav Petrov, we can perhaps take a moment to thank Mary Bowser for all of us being here today and for the state of the world being what it is. So that's a very dramatic story, and I've told you a lot of dramatic stories, and I'll close on one that's a little bit less dramatic. My birthday's in January, and for my birthday, I really didn't want to do anything special, and my friends wanted a party, and so I said, well, don't get me anything, just get like old clothes you're not gonna wear, or socks, or canned food, and we'll go and distribute it to the homeless. And we actually really like this. We went and decided to do it just once a month, and once a month we've done this kind of social thing. Here's all my friends hanging out. We would go to this restaurant, eat a bunch of food, then go to our cars, unload clothes, socks, toothpaste, shaving razors, food, blankets, to the homeless that were sleeping outside the center in Austin. I live in Austin, Texas. The center closes at a certain time, and then people sleep outside. Austin's very hot, and the temperatures can drop really suddenly, and people don't have time to get indoors, or they don't have time to get blankets, and people are frozen to death. And so we distribute stuff, and then we go party and drink. And so it's a nice social event, but it's great to make things more accessible to people that want to get involved in charity, want to get involved in making the world better, but it just seems like this insurmountable problem. This makes it kind of accessible. And I'm really grateful to all these guys for that. And I want to close with this. If you look at human history and current events, in times of chaos, it's always criminals, or at least someone with a criminal mindset, that sees the reins of power. So in future times of chaos, my hope isn't so much that this will change, but my hope is that the criminals that seize power are those that share my values. Throughout your life, you'll have the power and the possibility of helping others, whether it's a single person or perhaps like Stanislav Petrov, the entire planet, and I wish you wise judgment. We give a very special thanks to a few people. I'll read this off real quick. Special thanks to Sir Steampunk, Janice Kelly, Nex, Hard Knock, Trevor Barnhart, Shortcut, 10, Nix, Saf, Zero, Lucid, Snipe, Blitz, Angel, Carolyn Barnes, Jim Barnes, Peter Tangen, Theodore James, Michael Barnett, Jason Small, Mitch Altman, Michael Hertel, Marcin Wazinski, Malik Sullivan, and Hytham Nasser. Thank you all very much. So this is my index if any of you want to look up on all the information that I drew from to create this presentation. It's at tinyurl.com/KQ57Y8F. That's tinyurl.com/Kilo Quebec 57 Yankee 8 Foxtrot. You can contact me at zimmerbarnes@gmail.com. Right, that is my presentation, and I think at this point we can open it up to Q&A. I am not sure where a microphone is. So we want to start queuing up people. I guess you can just, I guess we can make a line in the center, and I guess you can speak loudly until we get a microphone to you if anyone has any questions.
Well, have you considered, like, mutagens, nuclear?
I think there's a presentation tomorrow on do-it-yourself biology and biohacking, and I would direct all those questions to them.
What's your progress
on the Iron Man suit? Depends on which one. There was a guy named Citizen Prime who made his own $5,000 suit of armor that's extraordinarily bulletproof. I'm working on a segmented Kevlar vest at the moment. Several other people are working with armor. There's powered suits. Problem with powered suits is battery life. They look great when you see these military suits and people can bench press a car, but it's not that great when they only run for 15 minutes at a time. So we kind of have to solve the battery problem first. Anybody else hear somebody? Yeah, well, it varies around the world, and I wanted to include that the information about the Mexican autodefenses groups because they went from vigilante to mainstream, and also people like the Fox were vigilantes where the police knew his secret identity but didn't go after him because they approved of his activities. Really comes down to the individual police officers. A lot of times we see the police as one monolithic group, but they're people just like us, and each police officer is going to have his own opinions and make his own decisions in terms of what priorities should be. Sure. Could you speak up a minute? Just a little bit.
Along the lines of the law, you brought up COINTELPRO. What should we as citizen activists do to thwart the efforts of the establishment trying to thwart our efforts?
That's a big question. What effort specifically?
So Occupy Wall Street was infiltrated by agent provocateurs, right? This has happened repeatedly throughout the citizen activist movement. So how should we approach, validating each other? How should we approach keeping an eye out for the bad guys? What do we do?
Most people that infiltrate will seek to disrupt and splinter the group off into a lot of different groups so that they're less powerful as a force as a whole. And this is really relevant to the hacker community. His name escapes me at the moment, but the man that organizes DEF CON every year recently made a very inflammatory statement where he estimated that 1 in 4 people in the hacker community were FBI informants. So look to your left, to your right, in front of you and behind you. Either you are the FBI informant or someone very near you is. So we definitely do need to be careful. And if you wanted to keep a group, if you wanted to have a group stay powerful, you would try to resist any efforts to splinter off into different groups or focus on differences. You would want to focus on similarities or common goals, would be my advice. Light. Yes, sir.
With migrant vigilante groups, have you run into trouble with not knowing who to go after and who to get as people, and what you know has been done about that?
There's certainly a big difference between vigilante justice and mob justice. Most of the stories I told you were individuals or small organizations, with the exception of the Gulabi Gang. The Gulabi Gang, you could certainly argue, is practicing kind of a mob mentality since they use overwhelming force. So I think there is a difference, I think, between one person acting and then a whole group kind of being swept up in this emotion and going forward. And unfortunately, things like mob justice, especially these days with social networking, can be whipped up really, really rapidly. And I don't think there's much that any single individual can do to stop this except pull the plug on the internet, which has been tried, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Yes, sir. I can barely hear you. Could you speak up, please? The police do operate several of those. When I was active in the New York Initiative, we took a lot of crime blotter information and put it into maps so that you could see what areas were dangerous, and then we color-coded it so we would have an area for carjacking. So like, don't park your car here, or muggings, don't go out here. And then we had another map that was time-stamped, or it was color-coded by time, so you could see it's not so much that this neighborhood is dangerous between this time frame. And then when you go later in the day or earlier in the day, it's not dangerous. So there's certainly efforts like that, and there's stuff like the NYPD Most Wanted. I was really excited. I was on the subway, and in the booth, there was a poster that the New York Initiative made of wanted criminals. The problem with the poster wasn't outside the booth, it was inside the glass, facing out. And I asked the woman where it had come from, and she said that a police detective had put it there, which is absolutely mind-boggling to me for us to kind of gain that kind of legitimacy. Anybody else? Oh, thank you. Thank you all for coming out. All right. Again, all of my research is here at this link. and my email is up if you have any more burning questions.